The crystalline spires of the Galactic Council trembled as Admiral Vextol of the Corathion Empire slammed his armored fist against a quantum glass podium. His 4 eyes blazed with the fury of a dying star, each one fixed on the holographic display showing Earth's latest transgression. "These humans," he snarled, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 conquered worlds, "have dared to establish agricultural colonies in the neutral zone. They violate the Treaty of Andromeda with their very existence." The assembled representatives from 47 species murmured in agreement. The Velthari's translucent forms rippled with anxiety, while the crystalline Kexmari chimed discordantly in their fear song. Even the mighty Braxon delegation, their metallic exoskeletons gleaming under the chamber's artificial suns, shifted uncomfortably in their hover thrones. Ambassador Yildena of the Corathian Empire rose gracefully, her serpentine form coiling around her speaking platform. "The humans have expanded beyond their authorized sectors 17 times in the past galactic cycle. They claim agricultural necessity, but we know better. This is territorial expansion disguised as farming." The Council's prime mediator, Ancient Corvlith of the Nexus Collective, extended his consciousness through the chamber's neural networks. His thoughts touched every mind present, carrying the weight of eons. "The humans have been problematic since their admission to the Council. Their growth rate is unprecedented, their resource consumption alarming." A holographic star map materialized in the chamber's center, showing the slow but inexorable spread of human settlements across the galaxy. Green dots representing agricultural worlds formed a pattern that made even the most peaceful species uncomfortable. The humans weren't just expanding, they were creating a network. "Look at this pattern," hissed Velkin, the Zephyrian one. "These are not random settlements. This is a calculated expansion. They're building supply lines, establishing forward positions. This is conquest through cultivation." The chamber erupted in clicks, hisses, and harmonic vibrations as species after species voiced their concerns. The humans had been too successful, too adaptable. In less than 2 centuries since first contact, they had transformed from a single species to a galactic agricultural powerhouse. Their food production capabilities had made them indispensable, but also dangerous. "They feed half the galaxy," protested delegation leader Nixara of the Peaceful Hegemony. "Their crops have ended. Famine on dozens of worlds. Surely we can find a diplomatic solution." Admiral Vextel's laugh was like grinding metal. "Diplomatic solutions are for species that respect boundaries. The humans see the galaxy as their garden, and themselves as the gardeners. They must be stopped before they choke out all other life." The debate raged for hours, but the outcome seemed inevitable. Fear had taken root in the council chambers. Fear of human expansion, human adaptability, human success. The vote was called as the twin suns of the Nexus system began to set, all in favor of military intervention to contain human expansion. Tentacles, claws, and appendages of every description rose into the air. The count was overwhelming for species in favor, only 5 abstaining. Corvlisation voice resonated through the chamber one final time. "The Council has spoken. We will send an ultimatum to Earth. They have 1 standard galactic month to withdraw from all disputed territories, or face the combined might of the Galactic Council." As the session ended and the delegates dispersed, none of them noticed the small communication device hidden in the chamber's quantum-mesh walls. Earth's ambassador Rivka Mendelssohn had heard every word, and she was already composing the most important message in human history. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you threatened a farmer's livelihood. The emergency session of the United Earth Council convened in the deepest chambers of Luna Station, where the artificial gravity hummed with the weight of impending crisis. President Amara Okafor sat at the head of the crescent-shaped table, her weathered hands folded as she read the Galactic Council's ultimatum for the 3rd time. 30 days, she said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of humanity's first off-world president. They're giving us 30 days to abandon 17 agricultural worlds and retreat to our authorized sectors. Defense Minister Calith Brahms leaned forward, his cybernetic eye worry as it processed tactical data. Madam President, our deep space sensors are already detecting fleet movements. The Carathians have mobilized their 7th and 9th battle groups. The Braxton are moving their fortress ships into position near the Kepler transit nexus. How many ships are we looking at? Asked Foreign Minister Yuki Tanaka, her diplomatic training evident in her carefully neutral tone. Conservative estimate, 3,000 vessels. Realistically, could be twice that, once their allies fully mobilize. Brahms's organic eye met the president's gaze. Ma'am, we have maybe 200 combat-capable ships in the entire human fleet. We built explorers and colony ships, not dreadnoughts. The chamber fell silent, except for the distant hum of Luna Station's life support systems. Humanity had spread across the galaxy on wings of hope and seeds of grain, never imagining that their success would be seen as a threat. What about our allies? Asked Agriculture Minister Dao Shengling, her voice tight with concern. The hegemony, the neutral worlds. Ambassador Mendelssohn, her image flickering slightly due to the quantum entanglement communication array, shook her head. The peaceful hegemony has already issued a statement of neutrality. They won't risk their own worlds for us. As for the neutral worlds, most of them depend on our food shipments, but they're not about to go to war over it. President Okafor stood slowly, walking to the great viewport that showed Earth hanging in the black velvet of space. The blue marble that had given birth to humanity seemed so small, so vulnerable. They're afraid of us, she said finally. Afraid of our farmers, our tractors, our hybrid corn. They see 17 agricultural worlds and think invasion. We see 17 worlds where we grow food to feed their hungry populations. With respect, Madam President, interjected Admiral Chen Volkov, maybe they have a point. We've been expanding, pretty aggressively. Every time we find a world with decent soil and climate, we're there within a decade, because people are starving. Minister Sheng Ling's voice cracked with emotion. The Velthari home system has been in famine for 6 cycles. The Kexamari crystal singers were dying off until we developed crystalline-friendly nutrients. We're not conquerors, we're farmers. The president turned back to the table, her dark eyes scanning each face. That's exactly the point. We're not warriors. We're not conquerors. We're farmers, engineers, teachers, doctors. We build things, we grow things, we heal things. And now they want us to stop because they're afraid of what we might become. So, what do we do? Asked Brahms. We can't fight the entire galaxy. Even if we had the ships, we don't have the trained crews. Most of our people have never seen combat. President Okafor was quiet for a long moment, her mind working through possibilities. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet determination. That made everyone in the room pay attention. We don't fight them, we invite them to dinner. The confusion was palpable. Admiral Volkov spoke first. Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand. The Galactic Council fears war because they think we're building an empire. They see our agricultural worlds as forward bases, our grain silos as weapons depots. They're preparing for a war that we never intended to fight. She paused, looking around the table. But what if we could show them what we really are? What if we could prove that Earth's expansion isn't about conquest, but about cultivation? Ambassador Mendelssohn's eyes lit up with understanding. You want to invite them to see our agricultural worlds? Show them what we're actually doing out there. More than that, President Okafor said with a slight smile. I want to invite them to meet the man who's been quietly revolutionizing agriculture across 17 worlds. I want them to meet Ezra Cornwell. The name drew nods of recognition around the table. Ezra Cornwell, the farmer who had developed the terraforming techniques that made human agriculture possible on alien worlds. the man who had personally overseen the cultivation of every disputed colony, the quiet genius who had fed half the galaxy without ever seeking recognition. "You think one farmer can stop a galactic war?" asked Brahms. President Okoffer's smile grew wider. "I think one farmer already has. He just doesn't know it yet." The shuttle Harvest Moon descended through the amber atmosphere of Kepler-4 for 2b, its hull scarred from countless trips between the stars. In the passenger compartment, Ezra Cornwell adjusted his worn leather hat and gazed out at the endless golden fields that stretched to the horizon. At 63, he had the weathered hands of a man who had spent his life in soil, and eyes that held the quiet wisdom of someone who understood the rhythm of growing things. "Never thought I'd be the center of a galactic diplomatic crisis," he murmured to his companion, Dr. Kira Volshin, a xenobiologist who had worked with him for the past 15 years. "You're not the center of anything, Ezra," Kira replied, her voice carrying the slight accent of her Martian upbringing. "You're just the man who feeds everyone. There's a difference." The shuttle touched down in a field of quantum grain, the crops swaying in the gentle breeze like a golden ocean. Ezra stepped out, his boots sinking slightly into the rich, dark soil that had taken him 3 years to perfect. This world had been barren rock when he arrived. Too much sulfur, too little nitrogen, gravity 20% higher than Earth standard. Now it produced enough food to feed 3 star systems. "The Galactic Council delegation will be here in 4 hours, Kira said, checking her chronometer. "Are you ready for this?" Ezra knelt down and scooped up a handful of soil, letting it run through his fingers. "Ready as I'll ever be. Though I still don't understand why they want to talk to me instead of the politicians. Because politicians talk about policy. You talk about soil." She smiled. "Besides, according to the intelligence reports, most of these species have never actually seen a human agricultural operation. They're making decisions based on fear and assumptions." The sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. A convoy of hover transports was approaching, kicking up clouds of dust that sparkled in the double-star system's light. As they drew closer, Ezra could see the diplomatic flags of the Galactic Council. The lead transport settled onto the field, and the delegation began to emerge. Admiral Vextel stepped out first, his massive frame dwarfing the human-sized exit. His 4 eyes immediately began scanning the horizon, as if expecting to see weapons emplacements instead of wheat fields. Ambassador Yildena followed, her serpentine form moving with predatory grace. Behind her came representatives from a dozen species, each one looking deeply uncomfortable in the agricultural setting. "So," Admiral Vextel rumbled, his voice carrying through the translator device, "this is where you build your empire." Ezra stood slowly, dusting off his hands. "No empire here, Admiral, just a farm." The Corinthian's laugh was like grinding stone. "A farm that spans 17 worlds. A farm that produces enough food to feed half the galaxy. Do you expect us to believe this is coincidence?" "I expect you to believe the evidence of your own eyes," Ezra replied calmly. He gestured toward the fields. "What do you see when you look out there?" Vextel's eyes tracked across the landscape, taking in the vast expanse of grain, the automated harvesters moving slowly through the rows, the storage silos gleaming in the distance. "I see infrastructure, supply lines, strategic resources. I see dinner," Ezra said simply. "Those fields will feed about 2 million people for a year. The processing facilities turn raw grain into 100 different food products. The storage silos keep the harvest fresh until the transport ships arrive." Ambassador Yildena slithered closer, her forked tongue tasting the air. "You speak of feeding people, but your expansion threatens the balance of power in the galaxy. 17 worlds is not a farm, it's a empire." Ezra walked toward the nearest field, the delegation following uncertainly. "Ma'am, with respect, I think you're looking at this backwards. We didn't expand to build an empire. We expanded because people were hungry." He stopped at the edge of the field and pulled out a small device, a soil analyzer that looked more like a garden tool than advanced technology. When I first came to this world, the soil was poisoned. Sulfur content was 60% above Earth normal. Nothing would grow here. But the Velthari colonies in this system were facing famine. Their crystal singers were dying. He knelt down and pressed the analyzer into the soil. Numbers appeared on its small screen. It took me 3 years to develop the bacterial cultures that could neutralize the sulfur. Another 2 years to breed grain varieties that could thrive in high-gravity conditions. 5 years total to turn a dead rock into a breadbasket. And in those 5 years, Yildena said suspiciously, you established a permanent human presence in a strategic location. In those 5 years, Ezra corrected, I saved the lives of approximately 4 million Velthari. He stood and looked directly at the ambassador. Ma'am, I'm not a general. I'm not a politician. I'm a farmer. And when I see hungry people, I grow food. It's that simple. The delegation exchanged glances, their translators working overtime to convey the subtle implications of his words. Finally, Velkin of the Zephyrian war strategist spoke up. If your intentions are purely agricultural, why do you resist our ultimatum? Why not simply relocate your operations to approved sectors? Ezra was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who had spent his life watching things grow. Because you can't relocate soil, son. You can't pack up 5 years of bacterial cultivation and move it to another world. You can't transplant the relationships between crops and local pollinators. Every agricultural world is a unique ecosystem, and it takes years to develop. He paused, looking around at the delegation. Besides, the people who depend on these harvests, what happens to them while we're starting over somewhere else? The question hung in the air like the scent of ripening grain. The delegation stood in silence as Ezra's words settled over them like morning dew. Admiral Vextel's eyes tracked across the endless fields, his warrior's mind struggling to reconcile the peaceful scene with his preconceptions about human expansion. You speak of feeding people, he said finally, but your species has a history of using food as a weapon. Economic warfare through agricultural control is well documented in your databases. Ezra nodded slowly. You're right. We've made that mistake before. But that's exactly why we don't do it now. He began walking toward a group of structures in the distance, the delegation following. Let me show you something. They approached what looked like a small settlement, prefabricated buildings surrounding a central courtyard. As they drew closer, the delegation could see that the inhabitants weren't human. Velthari, in their translucent pressure suits, worked alongside crystalline Kexmari, their forms chiming softly in the afternoon light. This is the Kepler 442b Agricultural Institute, Ezra explained. Every world I've helped develop has one. We don't just grow food, we teach others how to grow their own. A young Velthari approached, her suit's vocal synthesizer crackling as she spoke. Master Cornwell, the nitrogen fixation experiment is showing promising results. We should be able to adapt your techniques to our homeworld's climate within 2 cycles. Ezra smiled and patted her shoulder gently. That's wonderful, Sil. Keep me updated on the progress. He turned back to the delegation. Silni here has been studying our techniques for 3 years. When she returns to her homeworld, she'll be able to establish agricultural systems that don't depend on human support. Ambassador Yildena's serpentine form coiled with agitation. You're creating agricultural dependencies across the galaxy. These worlds become reliant on your techniques, your seeds, your expertise. Only temporarily, Dr. Kira Volshin interjected, stepping forward. The whole point of the Institute program is to create self-sufficiency. We're not building an empire, we're building capacity. They continued walking, passing through fields where human, Velthari, and Kexmari workers labored side by side. The delegation noticed something that their intelligence reports had missed: the easy camaraderie between species. The shared purpose that transcended political boundaries. "How many non-humans work in your agricultural operations?" asked Corvlith, the ancient Nexus collective consciousness speaking through a HFY drone. "About 40% of our workforce," Ezra replied. "Turns out, when you're focused on solving problems instead of claiming territory, species differences become assets rather than obstacles. The Velthori are excellent at atmospheric analysis. The Kexmari can detect soil mineral content by touch. The Zephyrians have a natural understanding of weather patterns." Vulcan, the Zephyrian war strategist, shifted uncomfortably. "You use our species' abilities to further your expansion." "I use everyone's abilities to grow more food," Ezra corrected, "including human abilities. We're good at persistence, innovation, and stubbornness. But we're not the only ones with useful skills." They reached a hilltop overlooking the main settlement. From this vantage point, the true scope of the agricultural operation became clear. Fields stretched to the horizon, broken by processing facilities, research stations, and living quarters. But what struck the delegation was the careful integration of the development, the preservation of native plant species, the waterways that had been enhanced rather than diverted, the way the settlements seemed to grow from the landscape rather than being imposed upon it. The intelligence reports describe this as a military installation, Admiral Vextol said quietly. "I can see how you might think that," Ezra replied. "We build things to last. We plan for the long term. We establish supply chains and communication networks. But our weapons are plows, and our ammunition is seeds." A chime echoed across the valley, the day's work ending. The delegation watched as workers from a dozen species made their way toward the settlement, their conversations mixing languages and harmonics in a symphony of cooperation. "There's something else you should know," Ezra said, as they watched the sunset paint the fields gold. "Every one of these agricultural worlds could be converted to civilian food production within a single growing season. No weapons manufacturing, no military installations, just food. And if we demanded proof," Yildana asked, "then you'd have it. Full inspection access, complete transparency. Hell, you could station observers on every world, if it would ease your minds." Ezra turned to face the delegation directly. "But I need you to understand something. If you force us to abandon these worlds, you're not just disrupting human expansion. You're cutting off the food supply for millions of people across dozens of systems." The weight of that statement settled over the delegation like a physical presence. They had come expecting to confront a military threat, but instead found themselves facing a moral crisis. Corvlith's ancient consciousness reached out through the quantum networks, accessing real-time data from across the galaxy. The Velthari home system imports 67% of its food from human agricultural worlds. The Kexamori crystal singers have increased their population by 40% since beginning trade with humans. The Zephyrian outer colonies are facing their first population boom in 3 centuries. Vulcan finished quietly. "Because, for the first time in our history, we have reliable food security." The delegation stood in silence as the implications sank in. They had come to prevent a war, but realized they might be creating a famine. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ezra spoke one final time. "Gentlemen, ladies, honored delegate, I'm not asking you to trust human intentions. I'm asking you to trust human results. Look at what we've built. Look at who we've fed. Look at the lives we've saved." He paused, his weathered face serious, in the starlight. "Then ask yourselves, is this really the enemy you want to fight?" The return journey to the Galactic Council chambers took place in thoughtful silence. The delegation's ships formed a loose convoy as they traveled through hyperspace, each vessel carrying representatives who found themselves grappling with questions they hadn't expected to face. aboard the Corinthian flagship Inevitable Victory. Admiral Vextel stared out at the swirling colors of hyperspace, his 4 eyes reflecting the cosmic dance outside. His aide, Commander Ziltek, approached cautiously. "Admiral, the fleet commanders are requesting updated orders. Should we continue mobilization?" Vextel was quiet for a long moment. "Tell me, Commander, what did you see on that agricultural world?" "I saw ... a farm, sir. A very large, very sophisticated farm, but still just a farm. And the humans, they were not what I expected, sir." The farmer, Cornwell, he seemed genuinely concerned about the people who depend on his crops, and the way the different species worked together. Ziltek paused. "It reminded me of the old stories about the Golden Age, before the wars began." On the Nexus collective vessel, Corvless consciousness was interfacing with the ship's quantum computers, processing terabytes of data gathered during the visit. The ancient being's thoughts touched the minds of his fellow collective members across the galaxy, sharing images and impressions. What we observed challenges our assumptions. His thoughts rippled through the network. The human expansion pattern is not consistent with aggressive territorial acquisition. It correlates directly with agricultural necessity and food security requirements, but the potential for weaponization remains, responded another consciousness. Their infrastructure could be converted to military purposes, as could any infrastructure, Corvleth replied. The question is not capability, but intent, and their intent appears to be feeding people aboard the Zephyrian cruiser Wind's Edge. Velkin found himself in heated discussion with his fellow strategists. The war planner's natural instincts warred with what he had witnessed. "They're too successful," argued Sub-Commander Hilton. "No species expands this quickly without aggressive intent. It's impossible, unless," Velkin said slowly, "their methods are fundamentally different from ours. We expand through conquest. They expand through cultivation. We take territory. They improve it. The end result is the same human presence across the galaxy." "Is it?" Velkin pulled up a holographic display showing population statistics. "Look at this data. On every world where humans have established agriculture, the local populations have increased. Their life expectancy has improved. Their nutritional standards have risen. If this is conquest, it's the most benevolent conquest in galactic history." The debate continued across the fleet as they approached the council chambers. By the time they arrived, the delegates had reached a reluctant consensus. The human situation was far more complex than they had initially believed. The emergency session convened with unprecedented attendance. Word had spread throughout the Galaxy said that the human crisis was approaching a critical juncture. Representatives from species that had never shown interest in council affairs were present. Their attention focused on the proceedings. Admiral Vextel stood to address the assembly, his massive frame commanding attention. "Honored delegates, we have completed our inspection of the disputed human agricultural worlds. Our findings complicate the situation." A murmur ran through the chamber. This was not the confirmation of human aggression they had expected. "Humans are indeed expanding across the galaxy," Vextel continued. "But their expansion is not military in nature. It is agricultural. They are, quite literally, farming. Farming on a scale that threatens the balance of power," protested Delegate Crixtel of the hegemony opposition. 17 worlds is not subsistence agriculture. "No," agreed Yildena, rising from her coiled speaking platform. "It is industrial agriculture designed to feed billions of beings across dozens of star systems. The question we must ask ourselves is, do we consider feeding people to be a hostile act?" The chamber erupted in discussion. Some delegates argued that the scale of human operations was inherently threatening. Others pointed to the improved living conditions on worlds that imported human food. The debate raged for hours, with passions running high on both sides. Finally, Corvlith's ancient voice resonated through the chamber's neural networks. The Nexus Collective has analyzed the available data. The human agricultural operations directly support the food security of approximately 4 billion beings across 67 star systems. Disrupting these operations would result in widespread famine. The chamber fell silent. The implications were staggering. Furthermore, Corvlith continued, the humans have offered complete transparency in their operations. They propose a joint oversight committee to monitor their agricultural activities and ensure compliance with galactic law. And if they're deceiving us? Asked Delegate Morgan of the warrior clans. If this is all an elaborate ruse to establish military positions, then we will have months or years to detect the deception, replied Yildena. Agricultural infrastructure cannot be converted to military purposes overnight. We will have warning. The debate continued, but the momentum had shifted. The fear that had driven the crisis was giving way to pragmatic analysis. The humans weren't the military threat they had appeared to be, but they were still a force that needed to be managed. As the session drew to a close, President Okoffer's image appeared in the chamber via quantum communication. Her presence commanded immediate attention. Honored delegates, she began. We've heard your concerns, and we share them. No species should expand unchecked across the galaxy. But we ask you to consider the alternative to human agricultural expansion: hunger, famine, and the collapse of food security for billions of beings. She paused, letting her words sink in. We propose a new paradigm for galactic agriculture: joint oversight, shared technology, and cooperative development. We're not asking you to trust our intentions. We're asking you to work with us to ensure that our capabilities serve the common good. The chamber was quiet as the delegates contemplated this unexpected turn of events. They had prepared for war, but found themselves facing an opportunity for unprecedented cooperation. The vote, when it came, was closer than anyone had expected, but in the end, pragmatism won over fear. The motion for military intervention was defeated by a narrow margin. In its place, the Council established the Galactic Agricultural Oversight Committee, with representatives from every major species. As the session adjourned, Admiral Vextol found himself thinking about the quiet farmer on Kepler 44, to be the man who had prevented a galactic war, not through force of arms, but through the simple act of growing food. Perhaps, the Admiral reflected, there were different kinds of strength. 6 months after the crisis that nearly sparked a galactic war, Ezra Cornwell stood in the newly constructed amphitheater at the Kepler 442b Agricultural Institute. The curved structure, built from local stone and crystalline materials provided by the Keximari, could accommodate representatives from dozens of species. Today, it hosted the first graduation ceremony of the Galactic Agricultural Cooperation Program. The morning sun cast long shadows across the amphitheater as delegates from 47 species took their seats. In the front row sat the unlikely trio that had become the face of the new cooperation: Admiral Vextol, now serving as the military liaison to the Agricultural Oversight Committee; Ambassador Yildena, who had become the program's most effective advocate; and Corvlith, whose ancient wisdom had guided the creation of the oversight protocols. Never thought I'd see the day, Dr. Kira Volshin whispered to Ezra as they reviewed the graduation list. Corithian warrior farmers, Zephyrian weather technicians, Valtheri soil specialists. A year ago, they were ready to go to war over our farming. Ezra adjusted his worn leather hat, the same one he'd worn to that first diplomatic meeting. Fear makes people do strange things, but so does hope. The ceremony began with the traditional songs of each species, a symphony of clicks, harmonics, and melodies that had never before been performed together. As the music faded, Ezra stepped up to the speaking platform. 6 months ago, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the amphitheater. This institute was just a dream. Today, We're graduating the first class of interspecies agricultural specialists. These beings will return to their homeworlds not as dependents, but as teachers, carrying the knowledge to feed their own people. He gestured to the graduates, a diverse group that would have been impossible to imagine before the crisis. Siln of the Velthari has developed atmospheric processors that can terraform worlds in half the time of our original methods. Kex of the Kexamari has created mineral sensing techniques that can identify optimal growing conditions from orbit. Hilvin of the Zephyrians has revolutionized weather prediction for agricultural planning. The applause was a unique symphony, tentacles slapping against carapaces, crystalline forms chiming in harmony, and the more familiar sound of human clapping. As it died down, Ezra continued, "But the real achievement isn't technological. It's trust. 6 months ago, we were on the brink of war because we didn't understand each other. Today, we're partners in the most important work in the galaxy, making sure everyone has enough to eat." Ambassador Yildena rose gracefully and approached the podium. "The Galactic Council has asked me to make an announcement," she said, her serpentine form coiling with what humans had learned to recognize as contentment. "The Agricultural Oversight Committee has completed its review of human operations across all 17 disputed worlds. The verdict is unanimous. These are agricultural operations, not military installations. The humans have been cleared of all charges." The applause was thunderous, but Ezra raised his hand for silence. "I appreciate the vindication, but that's not the real victory here. The real victory is what we've built together." He activated a holographic display showing the current state of galactic agriculture. The image revealed a network of agricultural worlds, research stations, and training facilities that spanned dozens of star systems. But unlike the ominous pattern the Council had feared 6 months earlier, this network was clearly integrated, with joint operations and shared resources. 17 worlds have become 43, Ezra announced. But they're not human worlds anymore. They're galactic agricultural centers, jointly operated and overseen by representatives from every major species. We've increased food production by 300%, and we've done it together. Admiral Vextel stood, his massive form casting a shadow across the amphitheater. "The Korathian Empire wishes to make a formal apology," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering. "We feared human expansion because we projected our own territorial ambitions onto your actions. We assumed conquest because conquest was all we knew." He paused, his 4 eyes meeting Ezra's gaze. "You have taught us that there are other ways to expand through cooperation, through service, through the simple act of feeding those who hunger. The Korathian Empire requests permission to establish agricultural worlds of our own, using the cooperative model you have developed." The request sparked a wave of similar declarations from other species. The Zephyrians wanted to establish weather research stations. The Velthari proposed atmospheric processing facilities. The Kexamari offered to create mineral analysis centers. What had begun as a crisis over human expansion had evolved into a galaxy-wide agricultural renaissance. As the ceremony concluded and the delegates began to disperse, Ezra found himself approached by a young human woman he didn't recognize. She wore the uniform of the Earth's colonial service, but her insignia indicated she was assigned to the new Galactic Agricultural Corps. "Dr. Cornwell," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Zara Okafor, President Okafor's daughter. I've been assigned to oversee the establishment of the new joint agricultural facility in the Vega system." Ezra shook her hand, noting the calluses that marked her as someone who had worked in the soil, following in your mother's footsteps. "Following in yours, actually," she replied with a smile. "I've been studying your techniques for the past 3 years. I want to help expand them to other star systems." "It's not about the techniques," Ezra said gently. "It's about the philosophy. We don't grow food to control people. We grow food to free them from hunger, from fear, from the need to fight over resources. Lieutenant Commander Okafor nodded seriously. I understand, sir, and I'm ready to help spread that philosophy across the galaxy. As she walked away to join her assignment team, Ezra felt a deep satisfaction settle in his chest. The crisis had passed, but more importantly, it had transformed into something greater. The galaxy hadn't just avoided a war, it had found a new way to grow. Dr. Kira Volshin joined him on the amphitheater steps as the last of the delegates departed. So what's next for the galaxy's most famous farmer? Ezra looked out across the golden fields that stretched to the horizon, where human, Velthari, Kexamari, and Zephyrian workers labored side by side in the afternoon sun. Same thing I've always done, he said, adjusting his hat against the gentle breeze. Plant seeds, tend the soil, and watch things grow. But as he spoke, both he and Kira knew that the seeds he had planted went far beyond grain and vegetables. He had planted the seeds of cooperation, understanding,